Hello. Hello, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the lunch and tour to the Parliament plenary hall. And we will continue. As the first part of our conference, we were discussing what has been happening during the last 10 years. Now we'd like to build up the vision what will happen during the next 10 years. What will happen with e-government, what will happen with online democracy, so how the technology will change our life around us, not only in this country, but globally. And one of the very interesting issues what is surrounding us is big data. And we have an excellent presenter from Microsoft, Chief Technology Officer for Europe, East Africa, and everywhere, Dejan Cvetković. And his topic is big data. Big data, is it end of privacy or just privacy redefined? Cvetko, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's always interesting to listen to the pronunciation of my both first name and last name, but when you say Cvetko, it's my nickname that my friends in Serbia use, so it's great. Anyway, I will be talking about privacy, and privacy is related to security, and security is a very dry topic, and you had lunch. So I will do my best to have some fun together with you in order to make sure you don't sleep, given the topic. Anyway, my name is Dejan Cvetković. I am a regional technology officer for Microsoft in Central and East Europe. I am employed in Belgrade, Serbia. My office is in Munich, but my real office is actually 33 countries of Central and East Europe. As much as I would like Central and East Europe to be everywhere, it's not. But you would be interested, it will be interesting for you to know that for Microsoft, Central and East Europe means everything from Cyprus to Estonia, and everything from Czech Republic to Mongolia, okay? And not only for Microsoft, actually, but that's what Central and East Europe means for the Western companies that operate in this part of the world. I've been with Microsoft more than 20 years. I started in 1993 as the software design engineer. I was coding the first version of Exchange. The first version was called Exchange 4.0. Throughout the course of the years, I had the luck and pleasure to work in the United States, in Canada, in Microsoft. I had the chance to run Microsoft subsidiary in Serbia, in Montenegro, and for some time in Bulgaria as well. But I am an engineer of electronics, never spent a minute engineering any of electronics ever since I graduated. I went into the software development and software business, and my passion is software development. And today, my passion is cloud computing, that I always talk about, and very much related to cloud computing is the topic of big data that we will be talking today. Now, I will just spend a couple of minutes introducing the concept of big data, but I'm not going to talk about any of the technologies behind this because I really want to jump into some of the privacy issues that are related to big data. I collected the thoughts based on my own and based on some of the industry experts. Might be provoking, would be curious to learn about your opinion about this presentation and some of the remarks that I will make. So let's start from there. Anyway, what is big data? Many definitions exist today. And you know, if you Google it or Bing it on the internet, what the big data is, you can read that it's a combination of digital data sets that is managed by statistic and different data mining technologies in order to extract some hidden information and get some very surprising conclusions. okay? Second definition, most powerful version of knowledge discovery that leads to non-trivial extractions of implicit, previously unknown, and potentially useful information and knowledge. Somebody will say these are the data sets whose size and speed is beyond any ability of any computer today to capture, store, manage, and analyze at the full scale. So at the end of the day, big data is big because it's massive, and it's big because it's fast. It's coming to you. And you would be overwhelmed if you step back or if you stand and try to capture all of that and analyze all of that. It's impossible. Big data is like a big, cold, fast river that is coming to you, and the only thing that you can do is take your hand and put the fingers in the water and use your experience to feel that water and come up with some kind of conclusion that can be useful for you. No matter if you are an enterprise or the government or the country, whatever. Why is big data happening today? Big data is happening because of three things. Because of the devices, because of the power of the internet, and because of the power of cloud computing. Devices. You can argue that today there's more devices that are connected on the internet than there are people in the world. And it will grow, and it will grow exponentially. Everybody has a device that is connected to the internet. And this is what we call consumerization of IT. Those devices are just dying to get data, just dying to consume the services. Services are consumable over the internet. Internet needs to be enough broad, enough powerful in order to deliver that data and services to the users. So the internet is growing as an outcome of the expansion of the devices. And those services, they need to reside somewhere. Where are they residing? They're residing in the clouds, in the big data centers from Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you name it. So there's more and more software that is delivering services and data to the devices over the internet. So this ecosystem of three is really driving each other, and the outcome of all of that is this data tsunami that is coming to us, and we just need to find out how to use it. Now, as I mentioned, big data is big because it has a massive scale. With that kind of massive scale, we can use the tools to transform that data to an equally massive information. And that equally massive information can then be transformed to the equally massive knowledge. So no matter if you are an individual, enterprise, government, if you manage to capture the data, big data, in a real enough time and transform that data in a real enough time through the information to the knowledge, you will have a competitive advantage against your competition. If you are an enterprise, and if you are a country, you can use big data framework to increase your national competitiveness. So that's why big data has potentially enormous economic benefits. A couple of months ago, I was at the data protection conference in Brussels, and I had the pleasure to listen to Mr. President of Estonia saying that the big data is the currency of the future. And that's such a powerful statement, and so much very true. Now, big data is growing exponentially. Why? Because computers are cheap, the processing power is growing, memory is getting cheaper, We can store anything for not a lot of money. Processors are powerful, so we can process that data, and everybody has devices. So you can argue, like my colleagues from Google basically say that today there is an exabyte of big data being generated on daily basis. Okay? An exabyte is 1,000 more than a petabyte, which is 1,000 more than a terabyte. So it's an amazing scale of data. Now, let's just address the usefulness. Not all of that information, all of that data is useful. But the unfortunate thing is the following. You can't say that this 2% of data sets are useful and this 98% of data sets are not useful. It's not like that. It's like every data set is useful, but only small percentage, only small piece of the particular data set is useful for the specific scenario. So that's why we need tools and memory to capture all of that data. Remember, put the fingers in the water and feel what is appropriate for us. What are the scenarios where we use big data? Here are some, but the definition of the scenario that is a great target for big data is the following. Every industry that is basing its action on the statistical information from the past that is derived from the knowledge, information, and data is a target for big data usage, and every industry that produces the data that can be used to gain the knowledge through the data mining is the industry, is the target for the big data. So healthcare, traffic optimization, information technology optimization, resource planning optimization, and those kind of things. So we introduced the concept of big data, so much for it. Let's dive into some privacy and security concerns. And before I do that, I want to say the following. I love Europe. I'm convinced European. And I adore this continent. I adore diversity of the countries, people, everything. I adore the idea of European Union, and I adore the energy, time, and effort of public servants that work in Brussels to create laws, regulations that would make all of us in Europe happy. The members of EU, like Estonia is, and non-members, like my country, Serbia, hopefully one day will be. So that's the statement. Now, we all agree about the huge economical benefits of big data that, as I mentioned, derive from great hardware, commodity hardware, cheap, clouds, data centers, networks, routers, internet, devices, iPads, iPhones, tablet PCs, whatever. Great hardware and great software. On a client side, rich clients that can consume the services. On the back end, software applications that provide services to those clients. But big data, because it's so big, it can capture anything, does raise certain privacy concerns. So if we step back and analyze what kind of documents, what kind of laws, regulations exist today, at least in Europe, I will be speaking from the European perspective, we can say that there is a document called DPD, Data Protection Act, Data Protection Directive, introduced many years ago during Mosaic time, right, that Mr. President mentioned. And there was a reform that was introduced just a little bit less than a year and a half ago, so in January last year, But European Union Data Protection Directive rests on the following core principles. Informed choice. What does it mean? If I am a user, I should know, and I know that my personal data is being processed by the certain data processor, period. That's the fundamental principle of Data Protection Directive. Second fundamental principle is data minimization, which calls for the need to process as least as possible information in order to gather certain knowledge without really diving into the very privacy of the particular individual. A lot of people in the industry today think that these principles are totally outdated and totally inadequate, and this kind of big data tsunami that is coming towards us is just going to smash those. This is not my statement. This is a lot of industry people are feeling, and you can read it on the internet today about the Data Protection Directive. To dive a little bit deeper in some of the core privacy principles, what is personal data? The straight definition is personal data is the information about either identified or identifiable person, okay? So personal data information about the individual, or we can use personal data to straightforward reverse engineering and do the process of identification of the particular person. And DPD really focuses on the quality of the data, so accuracy. Consent, if I'm a user, I need to know, and I agree that my personal data is processed, and then that's fine. Transparency, as a user, I know who is processing and where my personal data resides. Who can access? What is the outcome? Is there a confidentiality around my data, and is my personal data secure? And also, Data Protection Directive cares about transmitting personal data from European Union to third-party countries, including US, okay? Or from third-party countries to European Union and to the countries of European Economic Area as well. Now, what are the flaws of the Data Protection Directive? We believe, industry believes, that it relies too heavily on informed choice. So again, I'm a user, I'm informed that my data is processed, so I consent, I'm fine, do it. In reality, me, you, ordinary people, we don't understand legal language, we don't understand the language of policy. So the fact that we say, yes, do it, doesn't really mean anything, because we really don't understand it. Second, data minimization. Although it's a core principle of DPD, it doesn't happen. Why it doesn't happen? Nobody wants to limit themselves. So you can argue that this data minimization principle is always in breach in the era of information technology, because information technology can process massive amounts of data, especially now with big data. And definitely, Data Protection Directive was not written in the era of, internet everywhere, Internet of Things, big data and stuff. Data Protection Directive is old, so it didn't keep pace with the information technology. And as I mentioned last year, the regulation was introduced to improve it. That regulation does recognize that there was a massive, enormous development of the information technology that European Union needs to admit and really follow. And it did introduce some of the new principles, right to be forgotten, very important for Facebook, for instance, and right to data portability. What does it mean? Avoid vendor lock-in. If I use one data processor that is based on one technology, it should be technically feasible and easy to transfer that data from one provider to another provider. Now, how actually big data challenges data protection directive, and how I want to argue that we need to come up with something else rather than retrofitting the existing directives. The defining characteristics of big data when it comes to privacy, as I mentioned, massive and very fast, both online and on the devices. Then we use high-speed, high transfer rate computers with lots of memory, very cheap. And today, we also use some very new computational frameworks and algorithms that were not used before. You know, just remember 15 years ago when MP3 was introduced, right? Some of you might know that MP3 was the mathematical algorithm was introduced way before there was a technology to support it, right? And then people were arguing, okay, here's an MP3 algorithm. One day we will be listening music on personal computers or whatever devices, but that day will come in 10 years when the information technology reaches the level of development. Turned out that it didn't take 10 years, it took 3 years. And again, for data mining and an analyzing of big data, algorithms were existing before. It is the computing power that exists today that allow us to use this, capture and analyze the data in a real enough time. And I say real enough time, not real time, real enough. What is real enough for me might not be real enough for you, but real enough to gain that competitive advantage. Now, the fact is that the big data does enable what we call re-identification of the subjects by using non-personal data, and this just kills anonymization, right? And why is this possible? Big data is so big that we can gather a lot of information, a lot of digital bits that are non-personal, but by analyzing, massaging, doing data mining, automation process, we can lead us to the very individual. And this fact is not captured by DPD at all. And this scenario, where you actually use non-personal information to lead to a person, totally kills the distinction and the border between non-personal data and personal data. And this challenge has been introduced because big data is so big. Also, big data mining enables the automated decision making, because of all the information that we can collect, we can lead to a particular person, we can get his or her credit rating, we can get job prospects information, are they eligible for insurance policies or not, based on the history and things like that. And what is even worse, we can analyze all of that in a real enough time without them knowing that we are doing this. And that again is against the fundamental principle of data protection directive. So as you can see, the fact that we have big data today, the concept and technologies challenges the fundamentals of the privacy that was established by DPD. What about this informed choice that is the core principle, okay? Because data protection directive assumes that each and every person is aware that his personal data is being processed and agrees, provides a consent. This is not possible in a big data scenario. Why? The data mining process is the real enough time process. So the data mining process does not know up front who will be mined out. So you cannot inform the person and ask for a consent when in this real enough time process, you have no idea what the outcome would be. And that's just the reality, that's the fact. So therefore, the users do not have the knowledge about to be mined link, and therefore cannot agree. And as much as we would want to comply to DPD, the technology is way ahead and simply does not allow us to conform to this principle. Now, privacy also applies to identified or identifiable person. But the data that is derived from identified person can be a personal data or non-personal. And it creates a confusion as well. And the combination, as I mentioned, of personal and non-personal data can lead us to the discovery of people, individuals, personal and non-personal information. So again, big data introduces this, kills the fuzzy border between personal and non-personal data. Anonymization, as I mentioned, big data gives us the ability to reverse engineer using non-personal data, identify a person. And as I mentioned, data minimization simply does not happen because it just kills the competitive advantage. So the industry argues for the following. Instead of retrofitting existing directives, just maybe, why don't we think about the new business models? Why don't we think about the fact that we are in the era of consumerization of IT, where everybody has a smartphone. Or not everybody, but a lot of people have smartphone. And with that smartphone, people can actually be empowered, be in the driver's seat. And the industry is arguing for the fundamental shift, and I will read it. So from the world where organizations and companies collect and use information about their customers for their own purposes, companies' own purposes, to the world where people manage their own information for their people's own purposes. And of course, we're not technical, right? So we need applications and services that will let us do that, but that's the idea. So we used to have CRM or customer relationship management. In the future, we might have VRM or vendor relationship management, where people, customers, will actually choose based on how their personal data is analyzed in their domains, which products, goods, and services they need, and they will acquire those. And that's how the industry is coming up with the concept of PDS. What is a PDS? It's a personal data service, where the individuals are in the center of data collection, management, distribution, usage, whatever. I, user, have a smartphone with the application that uses personal data service, which is in the cloud. And based on the history, I know which vendor to tackle, which service to acquire, which good to buy. And I want that application to share my data very selectively and very granularly, just to share what is required for the particular scenario. Instead of having a service level agreement, I will have an owner data agreement. And in order for this to live, obviously, all of my information, all of my data needs to be secured. And we will talk about security as well. Data portability, we don't see an issue there because it's a topic even today, and the industry is indeed working on data portability, each and every vendor. And the accountability and the enforcement, right? So if the concept of data, of personal data services is breached, somebody needs to be accountable and penalized for that. So there is a legal framework that needs to be developed in order to support this. But this is an example of the new business model that could be introduced based on the availability of this kind of information that potentially is so useful for people, countries, industry, companies, everybody. So security, very important. You know, and it goes on the technical part of the implementation of personal data services, but personal data has to be encrypted both in the storage, so on premises, right, and also in the transmission. And the encryption keys have to be stored outside, right? And that is technically feasible as well. Mr. President spoke this morning about the need for multi-factor authentication, and that is technically feasible as well. And the encryption and the digital signature for the sake of protecting against repudiation of metadata will need to be there as well. So those are the security requirements. So again, at the end, I would leave you with this idea that big data has enormous benefits to the society. As a convinced European, I fully appreciate the efforts that there is a retrofit of the existing regulation, but just maybe the way would be to introduce the new business models that would empower individual users. And we, as people that deal with the information technology industry, should support the development of next generation APIs, next generation languages based on rules that would put individuals in the centers, and definitely encourage countries and companies to experiment with these personal data services by creating a framework that will incentivize those companies and put them ahead of the others because they decided to take the risk. I think that we can all agree that big data is just a great opportunity for our society, given the enormous knowledge that can derive and that we can use to improve our lives. And it is us that are responsible to make sure that the regulations and laws are not stopping this kind of technological development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dejan. Very encouraging and visionary speak. Big data is definitely, like you said, a river. You must just put your hand in, or even jump in. However, it's pretty cold outside still.